The story of a great flood sent by God or the gods to destroy civilization as an act of divine retribution is a widespread theme among many ancient cultures. It is best known from the biblical story of Noah, but there are several other famous versions. Many of the world's cultures, past and present, have stories of a great flood that devastated earlier civilizations. While not all flood stories are the same, the description of the destruction of the world by water is a common theme in many religions and cultures. Most flood stories include an angry god or deity and a catastrophic water event that destroys the world but is only survived by a chosen few. These flood stories also seem to have significant roots in science. Flood stories may explain geological phenomena such as volcanoes, earthquakes, floods, fossils, and other natural features of the landscape. The scientific community is divided about the history of such an event as a great flood. Most archaeologists and geologists recognize that there were indeed major floods that devastated substantial civilized areas, but most deny there was ever a single deluge in the last 13,000 years that covered the whole earth or even a major portion of it. Perhaps the oldest flood story is one of the earliest stories known to man, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Recorded on 12 stone tablets, this is among the first pieces of literature in history. In the Gilgamesh flood account, the highest god Enlil decides to destroy the world with a flood because humans have become too noisy. The god Enki, who created humans out of clay and divine blood, secretly warns the hero Utnapishtim of the impending flood and gives him detailed instructions for building a boat so that life may survive. Apparently, Utnapishtim was granted immortality after building the ship called Preserver of Life and surviving the Great Flood. Like Noah, Utnapishtim brought all of his relatives and all species of creatures aboard his ark to save mankind. Many scholars believe that the Epic of Gilgamesh was copied from the Akkadian Atra-Hasis, which dates to the 18th century BCE. Both the Epic of Gilgamesh and Atra-Hasis are believed to have originated in the Sumerian creation myth. Similarities between the account of Noah's flood in the Hebrew scriptures and the Mesopotamian flood tales are great and obvious. Despite some lesser differences, there is no reasoned body of opinion that claims they are unrelated. The accepted view is that the archetypal account originated in Mesopotamia. The earliest extant Mesopotamian version is far older than the biblical account, and the biblical flood stories bear specifically Mesopotamian details that cannot reasonably be supposed to derive from a Hebrew original. The Sumerian king list also contains a reference to the flood. The king list is a complex document existing in a number of different editions. Probably first composed around 2100 BCE, the king's list purports to record the kings and dynasties of Mesopotamia from the time when the first kingship descended from heaven until the time of composition. Early kings are credited with reigns of such fabulous length that Methuselah's span seems reduced in significance. The Sumerian king list appears to preserve the names and sequences of many early real rulers, a number of whom are independently attested elsewhere. The king list claims that after a number of antediluvial rulers, the flood swept over everything, after which kingship was again descended from heaven, and the list of dynasties and rulers resumes. As noted, the Judeo-Christian flood story was written long after the Mesopotamian original. In it, the Christian God became angry with the sins of mankind. He told his faithful servant Noah to build an ark large enough for his family, which included 8 people, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, and 2 of every creature on earth. God delivered the promised deluge, killing everyone and everything on earth except the population of the ark. After the flood, the ark came to rest on the mountaintop, a detail that is repeated in many stories across different cultures. This was an attempt to show the immense depth of the water and that it was higher than the mountains. Noah and his family were the only humans alive and are presumably the origins of the current human race. The same narrative is mirrored in the Quran. Allah told Noah to build the ark, the flood came, and then from Noah the world began again. Some cultures' flood stories bear only a slight resemblance to the story of Noah. They maintain the themes of the ark and an angry God, but their repopulation stories are wildly different. Zeus, the king of the gods, was displeased with the human population. Zeus told Deucalion, the son of Prometheus, to construct an ark for himself and his wife, who also happened to be Deucalion's cousin. After 9 days of flooding, the world was destroyed and the ark rested on top of Mount Parnassus. When the waters receded, Deucalion and his wife offered a sacrifice to Zeus to learn how to repopulate the earth. Zeus told them to throw stones over their shoulders. The stones thrown by Deucalion became men, and those thrown by his wife became women, which was a relatively tidy and magical way to explain the repopulation of the earth while skirting the whole incest issue. The Hindu deluge tale is unique from other religions. In Hindu teachings, Manu, or the first man, was not visited by God, but rather by a fish. In some tellings of this story, the fish is the deity Lord Vishnu. The fish god told Manu that the world would be destroyed in a great flood. Manu built a boat and tied it to the horn of a great fish. The fish guided Manu's boat through the floods and, not surprisingly, to the top of a mountain. When the flood waters receded, Manu performed a ritual sacrifice and poured butter and sour milk into the sea. After a year, a woman rose from the water and announced herself as the daughter of Manu. So it is Manu and his daughter that repopulate the earth. Throughout history and even today, flooding has been an enormous problem in China. The success of an emperor's reign would be judged on how well they dealt with flooding and protected the food supply. The Chinese have many stories and myths about floods, gods, dragons, and spirits. Just as in other flood stories, there are few survivors. But the Chinese flood story has a complicated repopulation tale. One day, a farmer managed to capture and imprison a thunder god. The farmer went into town but warned his children to stay away from the caged deity. The children took pity on the thunder god and released him. In gratitude, the god warned them there was going to be a great flood. He gave the children a large gourd and told them that they would be safe from the waters as long as they are inside the gourd. The rains came. The brother and sister got inside the gourd. They were the only people to survive the flood, and having a brother and sister as the only survivors made the repopulation part of the story a little tricky, since the incest taboo in almost every culture is very strong. The Norse flood story is starkly different from the others in that the world was flooded, but not with water. When Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve killed the giant Ymir, the blood that poured from his body flooded the earth. That's right, the world was drowned in blood. In this literal bloodbath, a single frost giant named Bergelmir and his wife made an ark, were saved, and repopulated the earth. The Aboriginal culture has a history rich in storytelling, and their flood story has a noticeable lack of the common elements. No angry deity and no ark. But the story is so entertaining that there are several children's books about the frog who flooded the world. A frog named Tiddalik was very thirsty and drank up all the water in the land, which caused an incredible drought. Creeks were dry, plants withered, and watering holes dried up. After many animals had died, all the remaining animals got together in a great council to devise a plan. They decided that the only way to get the water from the frog was to make him laugh. All the animals took turns, the kangaroos, emus, bears, and possums, with no luck. Finally, an eel wriggled and shivered and folded himself into funny shapes, and Tiddalik couldn't hold back any longer. The frog started a low laugh that sounded like distant thunder, and when he opened his mouth, water came pouring out, flooding the land. The flood gradually subsided, and the land was verdant and peaceful again. Native American tribes have long told stories to preserve their language and to teach values and moral lessons. Such is the story of Wenabuzu and the Great Flood. This story explores the time, which is not commonly explored, the period between the flood and the receding of the water. The story goes that the Great Spirit was unhappy with man and created a great flood. The only survivor was a man named Wenabuzu, who had made a raft of logs and sticks for himself and other animals that were alive. They floated around for over a month, but the waters had not gone down. Wenabuzu decided that he was going to have to rebuild the earth, and he needed mud from the old world buried deep underwater. First, a loon tried, but the water was too deep. A beaver was also unsuccessful. While they were arguing about who would try next, a small duck named Ojibwe said he would try. All the animals told him to go away, that he was too small. Then they continued arguing until the sun went down. Suddenly, someone noticed the body of the little duck floating on the surface. Wenabuzu picked him up and saw a small piece of mud in his bill. He revived Ojibwe, who flew away. Wenabuzu shaped the mud, and it became bigger and bigger. He needed a place to put it, and a snapping turtle, Mickeynock, offered his back. The land grew and grew until it was the size of the whole earth. In Hopi mythology, most people had moved away from the ways of the creator god Sotugnang, and he destroyed the world first by fire and then by cold, recreating it both times for the people that still followed the laws of creation, who survived by hiding underground. People became corrupt and warlike a third time. As a result, Sotugnang guided the people to Spider-Woman, his helper in the creation process, and she cut down giant reeds and sheltered the people in the hollow stems. Sotugnang then caused a great flood, and the people floated atop the water in their reeds. They traveled to the northeast, passing progressively larger islands until they came to the fourth world, a great landmass. The islands then sank into the ocean. The Aztec flood story shares similarities with the story of Noah with some radical plot twists. In this story, Titlacahuan warned the man named Netta and his wife Nina of a coming flood. Netta and Nina hollowed out a cypress tree, and Titlacahuan sealed them inside, telling them that they may only eat 1 ear of maize each. Here's where the story is wildly different from others. The earth is flooded, but the people weren't killed. Instead, they were turned into fish. After the flood, Netta and Nina disobeyed Titlacahuan and ate fish, so Titlacahuan turned them into dogs. The story ends with the world essentially starting over again, only this time with a hardy fish population and a couple of dogs. In Inca mythology, the god Viracocha, the creator of civilization, destroyed the giants as well as the other inhabitants around Lake Titicaca with a great flood, and 2 people repopulated the earth. They survived in sealed caves. In Maya mythology, from the Popol Vuh, Part 1, Chapter 3, Hurricane was a wind and a storm god. It is from his name that the English word hurricane is derived. Hurricane caused the Great Flood after the first humans angered the gods because, being made of wood, they were unable to engage in worship. Hurricane lived in the windy midst above the floodwaters and repeated the word earth until land came up again from the seas. Humans had become monkeys, but later real people would emerge, and 3 men and 4 women repopulate the world after the flood. So the big question for our regular viewers is, what does the Great Flood mythos have to do with ancient astronaut hypothesis? Well, as we mentioned earlier, the flood stories pervade hundreds of cultures, and there are striking similarities to many of the accounts. It seems that at least some of these stories could be based upon actual events. Zecharia Sitchin spent decades studying the very texts that represent the earliest renditions of the story: the Sumerian creation epic, the epic of Atra-Hasis, the epic of Gilgamesh, the era epos, the Sumerians' king list, and the Bible, to name a few. Sitchin did not apply mutual exclusivity to these texts, and as a result, he was able to link all of them to the Anunnaki from which they spawned. According to him, the deluge was not a universal calamity brought about by an angry god, but a natural calamity seized upon by an upset Enlil to attain the desired goal. At the end of the last ice age, the accumulating mass of ice atop Antarctica caused by its sheer weight some of the bottom layers to melt, and it was nearing a point where the whole mass could slip off the continent. This would have caused an immense tidal wave surging from the south that could engulf the land masses to the north. Sitchin argues that the Anunnaki were well aware of this danger, and as the next orbital proximity of Nibiru to Earth was due, they realized that the heightened gravitational pull on this passage could well trigger the calamity. Throughout the mounting human suffering as the Ice Age became more severe, Enlil forbade the other gods from helping mankind. It is evident from the details in the Epic of Atra-Hasis that his intention was to have mankind perish by starvation, but Enki, defying Enlil's commands, found ways of helping mankind sustain itself, mainly by ingenious catches of fishes. He was especially helpful to his faithful follower Atra-Hasis, a demigod charged with acting as the go-between to the Anunnaki and their human servants in the settlement of Shuruppak, a city under the patronage of Ninmah. The text explains that Enlil pronounced, "The noise of mankind has become too annoying. Their uproar deprives me of sleep." And so he made the other leaders swear that what is about to happen, the avalanche of water, would be kept a secret from the earthlings so that they would perish. Enlil opened his mouth to speak and address the assembly of all the gods. "Come, all of us, and take an oath regarding the killing flood." That the Anunnaki themselves were preparing to abandon Earth in their shuttlecraft was another part of the secret that the gods swore to keep from mankind, but as all the others took the oath, Enki resisted. "Why will you bind me with an oath?" he asked. "Am I to raise my hand against my own humans?" A bitter argument ensued, but in the end, Enki too was made to swear not to reveal the secret. It was after that fatal oath-taking ceremony that Atra-Hasis, staying day and night at the temple, received the following message in a dream. The gods commanded total destruction. Enlil imposed an evil deed on the humans. Atra-Hasis opened his mouth and addressed his god. "Teach me the meaning of the dream, so that I may understand its meaning." But how could Enki be more explicit without breaking his oath? As Enki contemplated the problem, the answer came to him. He did swear not to reveal the secret to mankind, but could he not tell the secret to a wall? And so one day Atra-Hasis heard his god's voice without seeing him. "Wall, listen to me. Read wall. Observe my words. Discard your house, build a boat. Spurn property, save life." Instructions for the construction of the boat then followed. It had to be roofed over so that the sun should not be seen from inside it, pitched all over with tar above and below. Then Enki opened the water clock and filled it. He announced to him the coming of a killing flood on the seventh night. A depiction on a Sumerian cylinder seal appears to have illustrated the scene, showing the reed wall, held by a priest, Enki as a serpent god, and the hero of the deluge getting instructions. The construction of the boat obviously could not have been hidden from the other people, so how could it be done without alerting them to the coming catastrophe? For that, Atra-Hasis was instructed to explain to the others that he was building the boat in order to leave the city. He was to tell them that, as a worshipper of Enki, he could no longer stay in a place controlled by Enlil. "My god does not agree with your god. Enki and Enlil are angry with one another. Since I reverence Enki, I cannot remain in the land of Enlil. I have been expelled from my house." When the boat was finished, according to Atra-Hasis' text, the townspeople helped him load it with food and water, as well as with clean animals, fat animals, wild creatures, cattle, winged birds of the sky. The list is akin to the one in Genesis, according to which the Lord's instructions to Noah were to bring into the ark 2 of each species, male and female, of every living thing of flesh, of the fowls after their kind, and of the cattle after their kind. The embarkation of pairs of animals has been a favorite subject of countless artists, be it master painters or illustrators of children's books. It has also been one of the eyebrow raisers of the tale, deemed a virtual impossibility and thus more of an allegorical way to explain how animal life continued even after the deluge. As a result, doubt is cast on the factuality of the whole deluge story. It is therefore noteworthy that the deluge recension in the Epic of Gilgamesh offers a totally different detail regarding the preservation of animal life. It was not the living animals that were taken aboard. It was their seed that was preserved. The text in Tablet 11, lines 21 through 28, quotes Enki speaking thus to the wall. Reed hut, wall, wall. Reed hut, hearken, wall, reflect. Man of Shurupak, son of Ubar-Tutu, abandon your house, build a ship, give up possessions, seek thou life, forswear gods the life to keep. Aboard the ship, take thou the seed of all living things. We learn from line 83 in the tablet that Utnapishtim has indeed brought on board whatever I had of the seed of living beings. Clearly, this is a reference not to plant seeds, but to that of animals. The assigning by the Sumerian/Mesopotamian texts of the role of mankind's savior to Enki makes much sense. He was the creator of the atom and of Homo sapiens, and thus he understandably called the doomed earthlings my humans. As chief scientist of the Anunnaki, he could select, obtain, and provide the seed of all living things for preservation, and possessed the knowledge of resurrecting those animals from their seed DNA. He was also best suited for the role of the designer of Noah's Ark, a vessel of a special design that could survive the avalanche of water. All the versions agree that it was built according to exact specifications provided by the deity. Contrary to the popular notion that the watery calamity resulted from an excessive rainfall, the biblical and early Mesopotamian texts make it clear. Though rains followed as the temperatures dropped, the catastrophe began with a rush of wind from the south followed by a watery wave from the south. The source of the waters was the fountains of the great deep, a term that referred to the great and deep oceanic waters beyond Africa. As the ice over Antarctica slipped into the Indian Ocean, it caused an immense tidal wave. Gushing forth across the ocean northward, the wall of water overwhelmed the continental coastline of Arabia and rushed up the Persian Gulf. Then it reached the funnel of the land between the rivers, engulfing all the lands. As the deluge overwhelmed the lands and destroyed all upon them, the Anunnaki themselves were airborne, orbiting the earth in their spacecraft. In this spacecraft where Ishtar was, she cried out like a woman in travail, lamenting that the olden days are alas turned to clay. In her spacecraft, Ninmah, who shared in the creation of mankind, bewailed what she was seeing. My creatures have become like flies, filling the rivers like dragonflies, their fatherhood taken away by the rolling sea. Enlil and Ninurta, accompanied no doubt by others from Mission Control Center in Nippur, were in another spacecraft. So were Enki, Marduk, and the others of Enki's clan. Their destination, too, was the peaks of Ararat that would emerge from under the waters before all else. But all except Enki were not aware that a family of humans, saved from the calamity, was also headed that way. According to the biblical tale, after the ark had come to a rest on the peaks of Ararat and the waters receded from the drenched earth, Noah and his sons and his wife and the wives of his sons who were with him, plus the animals that were in the ark, left the boat. And Noah built an altar unto Yahweh, and he took of every clean cattle and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And Yahweh smelled the pleasant savor, and said in his heart, I will no longer accurse the earth because of man. And Elohim blessed Noah and his sons, and said to them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the earth. When at length Enlil arrived and saw the ship, he was infuriated. Has some living soul escaped? No man was to survive the destruction. His foremost son, Ninurta, said to Enlil, "Who other than Ea can devise plans? It is Ea who knows every matter." Joining the gathering, Enki admitted what he had done. But he made sure to point out he did not violate his oath to secrecy. "I did not disclose the secret of the gods," he said. "All he did was to let Atra-Hasis see a dream. And this clever human perceived the secret of the gods by himself. Since that is how things had turned out," Enki told Enlil, "would it not be wiser to repent? Was not the whole plan to destroy mankind by the deluge a big mistake? Thou wisest of the gods, thou hero, how couldst thou, unreasoning, bring such a calamity about?" Whether it was this sermon or a realization that he ought to make the best of the situation, the text does not make clear. Whatever the motives, Enlil did have a change of heart. This is how Utnapishtim described what ensued. "Thereupon Enlil went aboard the ship. Holding me by the hand, he took me aboard. He took my wife aboard and made her kneel by my side. Standing between us, he touched our foreheads to bless us." The Bible simply states that after Yahweh had repented, Elohim blessed Noah and his sons. From the Mesopotamian sources, we learn what the blessing had entailed. It was an unheard-of ceremony, a unique divine encounter in which the deity had physically taken the chosen humans by the hand and, standing between them, physically touched their foreheads to convey a divine attribute. There, on Mount Ararat, in full view of the Anunnaki, Enlil bestowed immortality upon Utnapishtim and his wife, proclaiming thus, "Here too Utnapishtim has been just a human. Henceforth Utnapishtim and his wife shall be like gods unto us. Utnapishtim shall reside far away at the mouth of the waters." And thus they took me and made me reside in the far away at the mouth of the waters, Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh. The amazing part of this tale is that Utnapishtim was relating it to Gilgamesh some 10,000 years after the deluge.